I was pretty unhappy in all my relationships. And I couldn't figure out why. And I had a lot of judgments about other people. And then one day I woke up and I thought, really? Is it actually even reasonable to assume that all these people are the jerks when you're the one who keeps showing up in all these relationships? I mean, what part is yours, Mary? And I I went to a nonviolent communication class around this time, and the trainer said something to me about how we're all inherently decent people, just trying to live within our values. We're just trying to live within our values, and we're not always very good at it, and we don't always know how to do it. But nonviolent communication actually helps us start to align those two things, our values and our actions. And to me, this supports everything in my life, my business life, my personal life, all my relationships, my spiritual life. When I'm more in alignment with myself, everything works better. And frankly, I'm more pleasant to be with.
Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Mary, as I told you before we got started, what happened was the reason why we are having this conversation is because some time ago, maybe it was a year ago or so, I read Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication. And I thought, this is super powerful, very powerful ideas. And since then, I've been wanting to have a conversation with someone who understands those things, because now you are an expert, Mary, in nonviolent communication. But for me, it feels like that those ideas are, on the one hand, very, very powerful and useful. On the other, at least I'm talking based on my own experience, it feels like if I think about situations where I have an argument or I disagree with someone or I need to hold difficult conversations, it feels like that as humans, we do the opposite. We are built biologically to do the opposite, if I think about the ideas in nonviolent communication. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. And for those who know nothing about nonviolent communication, or maybe for someone who has heard of the idea, but they don't know it in detail, at a high level, could you take us through perhaps the core philosophy of nonviolent communication?
Sure, happy to. So, nonviolent communication is a process that was started by a man named Marshall Rosenberg many years ago. And it basically wraps around the idea that in order for us to resolve conflicts in a way that truly cares for all parties, it has to include some level of empathy and compassion for all parties involved. And which is in a way kind of a mouthful maybe to take in, like, how do you do that? But one of the things that I really love about nonviolent communication is that it's a philosophy, a way of being in the world, yes, but more importantly for me is it offers specific tools on how to get there. Like, how do you actually do that big statement, bringing empathy and compassion into our conversation so that we can care for all needs? I mean, it sounds like such a big thing. The process itself is very direct, and it's also partly what I like about it. We don't suggest that people talk around important things, but get right to the heart of it. And so it's quite direct, and it's also quite honest. So I would say that's the basic principle of it. It's taught in all parts of the world, actually, everywhere in the world. There are NVC people.
You mentioned empathy and compassion. Now, talking about empathy, my understanding is that non-violent communication focuses on that particular point, which is not just empathy for others, which is crucial in communication, but also self-empathy. Before we can think about having empathy for others, we need to start with ourselves. How do you see that? Can you explain this idea of self-empathy from the perspective of non-violent communication?
Mm-hmm. So the way I think about it is, I think lots of us have behaviors that aren't working for us. And many times we don't really stop to think about why. I'll give you one of mine as an example. So I had this strong need to be heard often. And so if I thought you weren't hearing me, I would talk loud and I'd move in closer to you, right? I did this over and over and over for so many years. And then when I started learning nonviolent communication, I started to get, oh, wait, in this moment, I have a need to be heard. And talking loud and getting in someone's face is never going to get me there. And so self-empathy is for me about getting clear about what it is that I want in my life. And what do I need to do to head there, to at least live a life that's in harmony with my values at the very least, instead of this place of reaction and, sort of bouncing off what other people are doing.
You've mentioned the word need a couple of times already. And again, I know that NVC, like for our listeners, when we say from now on, NVC stands for nonviolent communication. It's a big focus of that. And in preparation for this conversation, I was having a look at some of your articles online. That there's one where you say that everything someone does or says is an attempt to meet a need. Now, tell me more about this.
Yeah. We have sort of a unique way of looking at need in nonviolent communication. And we think of needs as those things that everybody in the world needs in order to thrive, no matter where you live, no matter what your culture is, how you were raised, how much money you do or don't have. Regardless of all of that, there are certain qualities that we need in order to thrive, like respect, love, joy, compassion, safety, security. And we think that all action, or inaction actually, all words are in support of meeting some of those needs. So my example of wanting to be heard, so I would talk loud, I'm not saying it was, it wasn't a good way of getting there, but ultimately what I was trying to do by talking louder was to be heard. And so sometimes we have behaviors that don't actually help us get there, but underneath all action and all words is in support of some sort of precious need that we're trying to meet. It's like, this is like a foundational aspect of NVC or nonviolent communication.
And Mary, I don't know if I remember this correctly. Again, I think it's something I've read recently from one of your articles, but I might be totally wrong. If that's the case, just let me know.
Okay.
Is it possible that I've read another principle of nonviolent communication is, again, if I think about needs, all of us, we have needs that we need to meet. And we should not take responsibility for how other people feel about, or how we make how other people feel about something that we said or that we've done, but perhaps we should take responsibility for our actions. Is that sort of accurate? Yeah? Feel free to
It is,
expand.
yeah, it is sort of accurate. It's I would say it's a nuance. What you're talking about is a nuance of nonviolent communication. And basically, it stems from an idea that what I'm responsible for as a person are my actions and my feelings and the impact I have on other people. But I'm not responsible necessarily for how you take what I say or how what I say affects you. I care about it, but I'm not going to say it's my fault. So let me see if I can come up with an example, because this really is sort of one of those really tricky, nuanced things. Oh, yeah. I think anytime we have a conversation with someone, we bring with us every conversation we've ever had with anybody else. We bring our entire life experience with us to that conversation, and so does the other person. And so we have a tendency as people, and it's really quite natural, truly, is to make meaning out of what happens. So you and I are having a conversation, and I'm over here creating all kinds of meaning about what you're saying. It might not have anything at all to do with what you're really trying to say. And so while you saying something that might offend me is important in our relationship, and I'd really like you to care for the impact of it, I don't want you to take responsibility for how I interpreted it or how I felt, how I feel about it, because that's probably more likely related to all these other conversations I've just brought to the table. Does that make sense?
Understood. It does. It does. So thanks for elaborating. And let's have a look at a few of the other principles around non-violent communication. One is the difference between observations and evaluations. When someone does something to us, when someone says something to us, we can observe it, we can evaluate it. And I know that NVC makes this distinction. Can you tell us more?
Yeah. So an observation is something that you actually saw happen, and you're describing just what you saw. An evaluation would be, again, you're creating all kinds of meaning around it. So you're late for work would be an evaluation, or you're late for the meeting. Instead of, I saw that you came into work 5 minutes past 8, or I noticed that you came to work 10 minutes past 8. So what it does is it sort of attaches to an entire way of communicating with people where we're trying to create as little tension, not tension exactly, but misunderstandings between us as possible. And if I start out with an evaluation of you're late, or you're always late, or you're never on time, instantly other people are going to get defensive. I mean, it's like a basic human thing. They're going to get defensive, and they're probably going to start defending why they're late, or they're going to start telling you that they're not ever late, or one time and, you know, 2 years ago they were on time. You're going to end up in sort of a goofy argument about whether the person's late or not. But if we say a clear observation, there's less chance of miscommunication, less chance of ending up in that sort of odd, goofy argument about whether the person is or isn't late today.
Got it.
Does
It's
that
about,
make sense?
yeah, it's about avoiding those misunderstandings. And again, if I understood well, and if I remember well, because I read the book about a year ago, there are four key components of non-violent communication. One is observation that we just talked about, and then we've got feeling, need, and request. Is that correct? Observation, feeling, need, and request.
Mhm.
Can you take me through those four key components? Perhaps observation, we talked about already. What about the others?
Yeah. So if you think about if there was something you wanted to say to me that was important for you, observation in this instance would be, what did you actually see or hear? So you would say what you actually heard me say, or what you saw me do, like show up 5 minutes past 8 would be the observation. And then the feeling is the next one, and that is, how do you feel about that? Maybe you're frustrated or disappointed, or maybe you're aggravated. And the need would be back to that first thing we were talking about earlier, those values or those qualities that we think all people need in order to thrive. So how does my showing up late affect those values that are important to you, those qualities that you value? And the request is, what do you want about it? Now, so you've just said all this, now what do you want? So I'll give you an example. So if we're choosing the example of an employee who maybe hasn't shown up for an important meeting in the last, 3 times that meeting has been held, then the observation would be something like, I noticed that in the last 3 meetings, you didn't make the last 3 meetings, and I'm really frustrated, and I'd like more predictability or trust that the entire team can be there to talk about these important things. If we were to just leave it there, my guess is the employee would get defensive and start to defend why they were late or why they didn't show up or what's going on in their life, or tell you that you're rigid or you're a micromanager, or whatever they would do, they would get defensive, right? So if we add on a request, what do you actually want, though, as the boss? If the answer was something like, Is there something keeping you from getting to this meeting? Like, is there something else that's pressing against you that means you can't get to the meeting? Or is there anything we can do that would help you get to this meeting on time? Because it's really important to me that our whole team be together. Some kind of a request, it gives the employee a chance to respond to something. And also, we have a tendency to get more information from them about what's going on with them.
Yeah, understood. And I can see how I was also thinking about the opposite of that. So what would a manager say without following this process? One common challenge in business communication is around, and I also say myself, it's around giving feedback. Is there something to say from the perspective of non-violent communication around how we can give feedback without creating defensiveness?
Yeah. I think a big part of it starts from the relationship you have with the employee to start with. So I think that's just a really big area that can't honestly be denied. So that's a thing to build on before you're giving feedback. When you're giving feedback, I would say one of the most important factors is why. Are you giving feedback because you want to punish this employee, or because you think they don't do a good job, or because you think they deserve something negative? Then I think anybody on the other side of that's going to be defensive. Anybody would be, especially if you imagine the employee under you. I mean, even if you don't have a hierarchical organization, but you act in it like it is, meaning I'm the boss, and so therefore what I say is what happens, then you're going to end up with some unleveledness in the relationship. So if you can enter the conversation with true caring for the employee, and that your goal is to help them succeed, and the way to succeed is to be a better conduit for your organization, then I think that's the starting point that I'd like you to begin with. And then within that, what I'd like somebody to say or to focus on is very clearly, what has the person done that you're dissatisfied with? Not general things like your reports are unprofessional. It doesn't give enough information. See if you can give feedback in a way that the employee really gets what it is you want. And I would start with an observation, clear observation, again, feelings and needs, and what do you want specifically? And the request being something that the employee can walk away with and say, okay, I really get that what I'm being asked to do are these three things. And let me see if I can do that. Or if I can't, then it's an opportunity for me to talk to the boss and say, that's really challenging given what I've already got on my plate to do those things, or one of those things. But I think that the key factor is why are you giving feedback, and how much do you care about this person who's in front of you, who you're giving feedback to?
So the key is what happens even before you give the feedback. And then I understood that even the four-step process that we discussed earlier, observation, feeling, need, and request, can also be used to give good feedback. And now, Mary, if we think about, we already started thinking about employees and teams, leadership. Now, from that perspective, is there, if you think about organizations, companies, is there perhaps a common habit, a common communication habit that you think non-violent communication would challenge in the workplace? And if so, if you can think of something that most people in companies do in their relationships and communication, would non-violent communication challenge that particular habit? And if so, what could we do instead?
Hmm. Yeah, one of the things I notice in business is this idea, and I had this idea too. So I want to tell you that I lived from this place for quite a lot of years. And that is that it's more important to get stuff done than it is to develop relationships with your teams. And I would challenge that because, like I said, I had that habit. And I'm a person who can get stuff done. I can work really fast. And I like being around people who are fast and can get stuff done. But I noticed that my team didn't particularly enjoy working together, and they definitely didn't enjoy working with me. So I spent a lot of time sort of trying to get my way uphill to get to a place where we could work together and accomplish things well together. And then one time I hired this woman who, she was our help desk person at I run an online company. And I started noticing in team meetings, she would start chatting with people in the groups before we started. And I'd just be like, just losing my mind how much time she was spending chatting with people. But then I started to notice that our team was developing into a really tight-knit team that worked really, really well together. And so I decided to do an experiment, and I cut our meetings down a little bit in what I was trying to accomplish. And I allowed 15 minutes for her just to chat with people and to get everybody talking. And we developed into a wonderful team, very effective, very efficient. And so I guess what I'd say is I think we actually save time when we truly care about our people and we have an intention of trying to get to know them, trying to have a relationship with them and let them know that we do truly care about them. That, I think, is the most efficient thing to do. It's more like upfront work, whereas the other method is this sort of constant policing to try to get people to do what you want. So that would be one thing that I would definitely say.
Before we continue with this episode, I just want to share a few resources that I think will be super useful for you. The first one is check out either my book, Confident Presenter, or my colleague Phil Wakenall's book, Business Presentation Revolution, or both. These are books for business owners and leaders who want to take their presentation skills to a higher level. To make the most of the books, take the Confident Presenter Scorecard, which is an online tool that allows you to assess your presentation skills for free in less than 3 minutes. And then also, at the moment, I'm running a series of free presentation skills web classes, and I'd love to see you there. The links are in the show notes. Now let's go back to the episode. That's interesting, and it does resonate with me, Mary, because on the one hand, I understand in principle, and I can see that it makes a lot of sense. On the other, I guess I'm like you. If I need to, like, my natural inclination is towards getting things done rather than building relationships, even if I understand that building relationships is important if you have a team and if you want the team to get things done. And also, now I know that you have a lot of experience facilitating dialogue in high stakes situations. Now, from your perspective, Mary, what does it take to do that? What does it take to hold space for honest but that kind of communication which is also respectful? You want to be in when it comes to facilitating dialogue, maybe there's a team and there are people with different points of view. You want to be able to create space for honesty in communication, but you also want to create a respectful communication. How do you go about creating that kind of environment?
Mm-hmm. The way I do it is, first of all, I have an intention that most of the meeting is probably going to be listening to both sides and not about creating any kind of strategy for how we'll get through this or what we'll do. So when I do mediations, for instance, I do a 4-hour mediation. I expect that the first 2.5 to 3 hours is going to be just listening. I don't have any intention of trying to resolve it in the beginning. And I really believe that once people are heard, then they have a tendency to be willing to move to resolving something. But until that time, they're just going to be making their points and they're just going to be standing their ground. So the first part of it is really coming in with the mindset that you are going to listen, listen, listen. And they're not going to be able to hear each other very well, but that to me is what the facilitator's job is, to really listen and let them know that they've been heard. I spend a lot of time saying back what people are saying to me, like not word for word, not parroting necessarily, but of all the things that were just said, what are the key points that I think the other person really wants to be heard on? And I had one time in particular, I had a husband and a wife who were having a conversation with me about how they were going to split up how they were going to divorce and how they were going to do that. And at one point, the husband left my office. He was just screaming. He went storming out of the office. And I went out and just met him in the parking lot, literally. And I gave him like one or two sentences of just reflecting what I thought was so upsetting to him. And he literally said, "Yeah, that's it." And I said, "Okay, so are you willing to come back in and we'll work towards that?" And he did. There's something so powerful about just being got, just being understood.
I can see that also in the context of, for example, Mary, in our company, the main thing we do is public speaking, presentation skills,
Mhm.
and even with audience members, sometimes you have that person in the audience who feels like they're being quote unquote difficult, but I agree that often, even in those situations, all people want is just to be heard and understood.
Mhm.
So that applies also when it comes to public speaking. Now we're talking about, you mentioned the example of the husband and the wife going through divorce, or you've got disagreements. And this made me think of like going back to what we said earlier around empathy. We talked about self-empathy. Now, one of the issues, and this is that's a personal question. One of the issues I find it very hard is to show empathy even if I don't agree with the point of view of the other person. And I know that, but that's important. I need to be able to do that, to show to be empathic, to show empathy, even if I don't agree. So can you help me again from your perspective, nonviolent communication? How do we approach this difference between empathy without necessarily agreeing with what the other person is doing or saying?
Yeah, I'm happy to, because this was a challenge for me as well. First of all, I'd like to just say what empathy is in a nonviolent communication model. And that is literally understanding the needs behind, feelings and needs behind what somebody is saying or what they're doing. It's literally just understanding, or trying at least to understand it. And then the tool is to express it back. So you might say something like, "Are you hurt and want respect?" Or it sounds like you're furious and want to know that I'll get this done. So the thing about it is, it's a moment in time in a conversation. This is the first thing I like to remember. It's just a moment in time. It's not the whole thing. And in that moment of time, my only goal is to understand you. That is my only goal for this particular moment of empathy. And so I can do that even if I disagree with you. I can reflect back what I think is important to you, even if I disagree with how you think we got here in this particular moment that we're having. And the reason I can do that is because I also know that I will have time for myself. I will take time for myself in the conversation to also express what's going on with me. And I can say that I disagree later. I don't have to do it in this exact moment. So empathizing with someone who we don't agree with is truly about just getting where they are, just understanding them, not necessarily saying we're in agreement or that we even agree to what they're saying. Does that make sense? It is challenging because so often we're tempted to jump in and, we want to be heard too.
It, it, in theory, yes, it makes sense. Would it be possible, Mary, for you to give us an example, to explain this, if you can, if you think about maybe a hypothetical disagreement that two people might have? We can think about one right now if you want. And yeah, how could we approach that, maybe that particular moment, maybe what language could we use? Is that, can we try?
Sure. Do you have something you want to?
No, no, I don't have something in mind, but we can discuss it together. Do you have something in mind in terms of what a potential disagreement could be?
I don't really. If it's business related, it could be something about a performance
Yeah,
thing. Maybe somebody gave a presentation for the organization and their supervisor thinks it was poorly done.
yeah, let's do
Something
that.
like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So, let's see. So the employee would be saying something to me about why they thought they had done a good job with the proposal and their presentation. And so I might be just reflecting back what I think I'm hearing them say. So from your perspective, leading the presentation with these 3 points and presenting it in half an hour, from your perspective, that was the premium thing to do. Like that was for you how you thought would best represent the company. Is that right? And the employee might say yes or no or something. But anyways, in a sense, they've been heard. And then it can come back to me to say, I get it. I also think those 3 points are important. But honestly, I don't think they're priority. And this is at the point where I can start talking from my perspective about what happened. But initially, my whole focus is on the employee. And there might be some back and forth before the employee really is heard. And the way I know that they've been heard is they stop using a lot of words. When people are defending themselves, they use a lot of words. When they've really been heard, almost always, they'll say, yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. So at the point that I hear something like, yeah, that's it, or I see them relax, sometimes just even physically, people will relax a little bit, then at that point, I can start to say, yeah, I get what you're saying. It's not really what I think the priorities are. And then I can start talking from that perspective.
You see, it's those kind of situations and challenges that made me say at the beginning that I think that these principles and this approach in general is super powerful. Again, for me, at least, I don't want to generalize, but it feels like I'm built biologically to do the opposite.
Yeah.
The default approach for me will be the opposite, even if I can see how helpful this kind of approach can be. And now you
No,
talked about,
can I just speak to
please.
that?
Yeah.
Because I agree. I agree completely with what you're saying. It was a total turnaround for me to start having relationships from a nonviolent communication perspective. I agree. I think it's a paradigm shift. And I think it's the difference between spending so much time looking at what's happening or speaking to the tone of somebody's voice or the thing that they said or the thing that they did. And more than that, trying to get behind all those actions and those words and try to understand why. Why did they show up that way? Why did they say that? So I do think it's a paradigm shift.
And again, it starts with the intention behind what we do, what we say. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Mary, you talked about misunderstandings before. You said that one of the benefits of following a certain approach is simply to avoid misunderstandings. And I was thinking about misunderstandings also around non-violent communication. You've been doing these, you've been working in this space for many years. Have you encountered any either misunderstandings or misconceptions about non-violent communication? Like, what I mean is, like some people who think certain things about non-violent communication, and you think that's just a misconception.
I think one of them is if I'm going to spend my time being an empathetic or compassionate leader, then I won't be effective, or I'll have to put up with misbehavior or poor performance. I would say that is a huge misconception about what nonviolent communication is about. I think just the opposite, actually. We're much more direct. Whereas in some situations, I see business leaders not tending to things directly, one-on-one, tending to them. They might send things off to HR. And then HR gets involved and they talk to the employee. And it just creates all this mess and miscommunication and discomfort and lack of trust between people. But actually, nonviolent communication is more about having that conversation with that employee, like directly one-on-one, and having it with care for the other person so that you're actually building trust, you're building relationship with that person. And HR doesn't need to get involved that much also. So I would say that is one of the primary things. And the other one I'd say is an idea that there isn't time. There isn't time to develop relationships with your teams. And I would say it's not about time. It's not about the amount of time. It's about the time that you have with your team. How are you showing up? Where's your focus? Is it about caring for them? Or is it just about getting stuff done? Or is it just about doing what you want them to do? So I would say those are two that I would mention especially.
Yeah, yeah. And Mary, for someone who would, let's say that someone has listened to this conversation and that they like the ideas and perhaps they were new to them, perhaps they knew them already, but it was a good refresher for them, and they would like to start integrating some of these non-violent communication principles, this approach in their life, in their day-to-day communication. Is there something they can do like from today? It could be a habit, one small habit or something small that they can do today to start integrating some of these ideas into their life and day-to-day communication.
Yeah, I actually have two, and I hope there's time for both. So the first one is, so we talked about this concept of universal needs, where we think everybody, no matter who they are, have certain qualities that we all value in order to thrive in our lives. So one thing people can do is start to try to notice their world from that perspective. So maybe they're listening to somebody else have a conversation. While you're listening to the conversation, just spend some time thinking to yourself, I wonder why this person is doing that. I wonder what the underlying need is here. Or I wonder what the underlying purpose is behind this person's actions or words. You could do this watching the news or reading the newspaper or listening to your kids argue or whatever it is. It's just sort of getting in the habit of starting to notice the world from a needs perspective. And then the other one is about starting to spend less time judging your world and more time observing it. So something happens, and usually, when I said before about we create meaning about it, so usually we'll be thinking something like, what a jerk, or that's an ugly outfit, or that's unprofessional. We'll be having thoughts like that. Get in the habit of changing those thoughts into clear observations. Like he showed up at the meeting the last 3 weeks, 10 minutes late. Or they wore this color combo to work that is not pretty to my eye. Or boy, that tone of voice that person has is jarring to me. It's not so much about they're a jerk or they're doing something wrong. It's more about getting it down to just a clear observation of what you see. And I think when we do that, we have less chance, it's not an exact science, but we have much less chance of creating distance between us and other people.
And with all of these things, if people want to go deeper, because again, going back to what I said at the very beginning, for me, at least personally, yes, I understand them in principle. They make a lot of sense. Then being able to put them into practice, at least to me, is not easy. So for those who want to learn more, then you run programs and workshops and training sessions to help people do just that. And we're going to include your resources, your links, your website in the show notes. Also, I know that you are the author of a book. And talking about books, Mary, we're going to include that link as well. Talking about books, do you have any recommendations for our listeners? In addition to, of course, Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, any other books that are connected to the ideas that we talked about today that you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, I would have recommended the Marshall Rosenberg's book, and Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life. It's just a really terrific basic book on nonviolent communication. And you already mentioned mine, so I would recommend that. And then honestly, what I would do is Google it, because there are a variety of books on nonviolent communication that are on specific aspects. There are several by a trainer named Sarah Hart on parenting. There's one book by a man on NVC and business. I can't think of his name right now. I can see his face, but I can't think of his name. And so I would Google nonviolent communication and whatever application of it is most interesting to you. So that, like I said, there are things on business, parenting, education, general things. There's another book.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The one on parenting resonates with me because I have a 2.5-year-old son now, and I haven't thought about non-violent communication in that particular perspective. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, parenting is actually quite fascinating in nonviolent communication because children are way more skilled than we are, I think, than adults are at finding ways to value all needs, if the adult will help them understand what all the needs are. They're quite creative. They have far less blocks in them than we have. So yeah, I would really recommend that. Yeah.
I'll have a look. Interesting. And Mary, if someone wants to connect with you and say hi after this conversation, where do they find you?
They can find me on NVCacademy.com or marymackenzie.net, or they can email me at mary@nvcacademy.com, and I'd be happy to hear from them.
Perfect. Again, we're going to include everything in the show notes. And let's close with this. If you think about everything we talked about today, all these ideas around non-violent communication, is there an important question I missed? Is there something that you think I should have asked and I didn't? Have I missed something important?
The only thing that I think I would add is the reason I got into nonviolent communication in the first place is I was pretty unhappy in all my relationships. And I couldn't figure out why. And I had a lot of judgments about other people. And then one day I woke up and I thought, really? Is it actually even reasonable to assume that all these people are the jerks when you're the one who keeps showing up in all these relationships? I mean, what part is yours, Mary? And I went to a nonviolent communication class around this time, and the trainer said something to me about how we're all inherently decent people, just trying to live within our values. We're just trying to live within our values, and we're not always very good at it, and we don't always know how to do it. But nonviolent communication actually helps us start to align those two things, our values and our actions. And to me, this supports everything in my life, my business life, my personal life, all my relationships, my spiritual life. When I'm more in alignment with myself, everything works better. And frankly, I'm more pleasant to be with. So that would be the final thought I would say.
Thank you. That's a perfect place to end the conversation. Mary, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your ideas, your insights. Very useful. I've learned a lot. I'm sure that our listeners have found it valuable as well. And if they want to learn more, they know where to find you. Let's keep in touch. All the very best.
Thank you so much. I enjoy this very much. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.